is in that box, it must be very precious. So many people have died for it.
Yes, it is very precious.
I want half.
I agree with you. You should have at least half. You deserve it. For all the creature comforts you've given me. But unfortunately, the object in this box cannot be divided.
Then I'll take it all. If you don't mind.
Gabrielle. Listen to me. As if I was Cerberus, barking with all his heads at the gates of hell. I will tell you where to take it. But don't open the box.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Dan.
Welcome back to 15-Minute Film Fanatics. You know how the show works. I picked a movie that I love, that I've seen 100 times. Sometimes I argue with Dan about it. He finally agreed. He agreed to watch it over again, and then we can just come on up and hit record. But he's had time to do the Dan, which is where he prepares his notes ahead of time and lets the movie stew. So Kiss Me Deadly, 1955, Robert Aldrich. Very famous role for Ralph Meeker. And if you ever studied French cinema, this is one of those movies that kicked off the French New Wave. That's what they'll tell you in class. So, Dan, you finally succumbed to my badgering and decided to watch the movie over again. What'd you think?
Well, first of all, I also want to note that this was adapted by the novel by Mickey Spillane, written by A.I. Bezerides, who wrote Thieves Highway, which we love.
We do love that movie.
We do love the. So let's talk about this movie. So you have been badgering me for years to rewatch this movie, and I always kind of made a face. I got a long opening here, so I want to talk about reception history. Now, what reception history is? It's a part of kind of like literary study, and I wrote this book about Flannery O'Connor, about her reputation, creating Flannery O'Connor, wherever good books are sold, and it's all about her reputation, how reputations are formed. Because sometimes writers rise to the top of the literary heap, not just through their talent or in spite of their talent or despite having no talent, but because of how they're marketed and who their agent was and at what point in time they were. You know, we don't just read Shakespeare or see Shakespeare now because he was like, quote unquote, the greatest writer of all time. I mean, his talent is obviously unbelievable, but it has to do with the way he's been taught and made part of cultural institutions. All right. Why do I say that? I would love to do, and I'm being totally sincere, I would love to do a reception history of this movie and pinpoint the exact moments where its stock rose. Because, and this is going to sound snarkier than I want it to be, there's very little in this movie to suggest it would become the beloved movie that it is. It was famous by, the Kefauver Commission. Do you know this? In 1955, they singled this movie out as a cause of juvenile delinquency. So that's a great thing. That certainly rose its stock. But all I can think about is that everybody loves this movie because of the ending, and we'll talk about the ending when we get to it, right? But at some point, and it's so funny you just said this about the French New Wave, at some point, film theorists grabbed this movie and it wouldn't let go. I saw it for the first time in grad school, and people went bananas about this movie. I sat there with one eyebrow raised. And it's not terrible. Like, I'm not like dumping on the movie, but the idea that this movie deserves its reputation, I think is not, and I don't want to say it's unwarranted, because then it's just like, well, my dad could beat up your dad, or like, it's like trying to argue with somebody why they should like pistachios. Like, if you love the movie, you love the movie. But I think if you look at the other noir we've done, like Out of the Past, Detour, you look at The Big Sleep, No Time for Tears, this has all that noir stuff in it, but it just doesn't hold up with these other films. And I'm fascinated how it arrived at this hallowed spot in the pantheon. So why did it? What do you think?
I know why the French liked it, which is that it seemingly breaks down narrative and visual norms, right? Nobody shoots like that. People don't talk like that. cause and effect shouldn't work like that. I know it doesn't give you what you expect to go into a movie to get. And in fact, it seems designed to deny you some of the pleasures of film, but to try to replace them with other pleasures. There's many things that I didn't like about Baz Luhrmann's new Elvis movie, but somewhere along the line, one character says to another that really great performances give you something and you're not sure how to feel about it, or it makes you feel pleasure from something you're not sure that you should feel pleasure from. And I think that's the overriding mood of Kiss Me Deadly. Mike Hammer is not a good person. His search to find out what happens to this woman and what he ultimately gets wrapped in lacks nobility from start to finish, to the point where even staircases are not shot the way that staircases should be. Boxing gyms, to precursor my moment, are not shot the way boxing gyms should be in other movies. And so the deliberate stifling of audience expectations and the replacement with something else, whether that's mood, and maybe I could see how if you can't get into the mood or the particular flavor of this movie does not appeal to you, then no individual scene is going to appeal to you, because I think that they exist largely in relation to one another to create and sustain that mood. But I think that it's in the denial of expectation first.
But I think that's also like the deductive school of film criticism. I think that people say this movie's great, and I'm going to find out reasons why it's great, instead of the other way, which is kind of like you watch a movie like, wow, this movie's really, really good. It's like it's been put out there as this masterpiece. So you just said, well, it's great because it denies all your expectations. Well, every great movie denies your expectations in some way, right? Every great book denies your expectations in some way.
Out of the Past is a great movie that gets away with something you shouldn't be able to get away with, which is nobody likes flashbacks that are that prolonged. Nobody, but I do when I watch Out of the Past, but it makes me fall in love with its characters. It plays on my humanity. When I saw this movie, I didn't have somebody standing over me telling me it was great. I knew it didn't feel like other movies. There's sometimes you're watching a movie and you think, man, just slap that guy.
Why did you see it? Why did you see it the first time you saw it?
Well, it was in a film class, but
right,
nobody said it was a masterpiece.
But it's being shown in a film class. That gives it some kind of clout, right? But I mean, but still, like the fact that like film schools love this movie, but I think that love is kind of irrational, which I guess all love is to some degree, right? But you know, this movie's got like Ralph Meeker's a cipher. He's just no good in this. There's not and I know this is going to make you go crazy. You ready? And you can't see Mike's about to roll his eyes. Get ready. There's not one memorable line in the whole movie. And don't say va-va-voom. Do not say va-va-voom as the memorable line.
So don't take a memorable line, any memorable line but that.
Yeah, well, that's one of the problems with the movie, is that this movie is very, very clunky. You know, Robert Aldrich also went on to direct The Dirty Dozen, which I saw recently, and everybody remembers The Dirty Dozen as, I think, a little better than it is. Because you may remember I kept saying we should do The Dirty Dozen, and I kind of stopped saying that because I watched it again. You're like, yeah, there's like an hour of this movie you could lose very, very easily because you remember it better than it is. And I think that this movie is filled with clunkiness.
I don't know then how to explain why I find it compelling. Nobody told me to find it compelling, is what I'm saying. I could understand. I did later study the French New Wave, and I rewatched this movie by somebody who said, okay, let's watch the American movies that influenced, Cahiers du Cinema or something like that, where Godard helped launch the New Wave with Francois Truffaut or something like that. But that's not how I saw this movie. I saw this movie as somebody who, for reasons unattached to the fact that the film that they just want the movie to work, is out for themselves. It's one of the first movies for me, seeing it as a young man, that makes sense because some guy is just out for himself and just wants to figure out the way things work. Which, if they made a movie about me, is how that movie would work, because I'm not the guy from Out of the Past, and I'm not Indiana Jones. I don't think it belongs in a museum. I am much more Mike Hammer, if I were looking for something, that's the reason that I would be looking for it. I think it has to do with it has to do with a lot of the things that we either have fulfillment dreams or nightmares about, and how quickly a fulfillment dream turns into a nightmare, and the fact that in 1 second you're getting what you want, the next second you're not getting what you want, and nothing seems to make sense except I know that I have to go to the end of the dream, or that I want to go to the end of the dream. And so I think it works on an intuitive logic that doesn't have a lot to do with slick art. I know that I like it for its lack of slickness, which I heard you malign, but we'll skip over that.
Okay, right. Maybe point taken. I mean, there's plenty of movies that are not slick, which we
can agree that the shoes are very clackety.
The shoes are so clackety, and there's moments in it, right? Like her dangling feet in the pliers, horrifying. He gets more done with that one image than whole movies do in terms of like making your stomach hurt. And there's moments in it that are great, but all I'm saying is that when you look at this film, if you were just shown 10 films in a row and you knew nothing about any of them, I don't think this movie would make an impression. I think it's been carried along the wave of film criticism.
That's a freaky thought experiment. No,
it's not a freaky thought experiment.
Our film watching does not exist in a vacuum. I think that this film in particular works in the logic that's written into the human brain of, I want something, I know something's standing in my way, but I'm going to go get it. And without ulterior motivation.
Well, that's every detective movie. Every detective movie is, I want to find out how the world works. There's something wrong with the world, I'm going to fix it.
Well, yeah, Mike Hammer doesn't want to fix it. He just wants it.
He wants his cut because it's bigger than a divorce case. That's what he's like. He tells the secretary, we're onto something big here. He's going to cash in on it. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And I think that's like the Matthew effect. How like the more the thing is praised, the more praise it receives.
Okay, well. No, but here's why. Because the reason that this movie got made is because the exact same effect that I'm describing is directly from the Mike Hammer novels, which were furiously successful and worked very different than any other detective novel that were out. And again, I'm not going to call Mike Hammer like the anti-Dick Tracy or something like that, but there is a sense in which Mike Hammer is always out for Mike Hammer. And you can say that the detective novels themselves are clumsy. In fact, many people did. But Mickey Spillane sold millions and millions and millions of copies for exactly that reason, because he was tapping into some kind of, I mean, I'll say it's destructive energy. But it was an unadulterated dose of destructive energy in 200 pages, such that I have an omnibus edition of Mike Hammer novels where 4 or 5 of them, seem to fit in the space of 300 pages. So I don't know, how long they are, but they sold out of every newsstand before they decided to make these. In fact, I think some of the clumsiness that you're talking about might even be an indication that these are extremely faithful adaptations. Can you imagine a slick Mike Hammer movie? It seems difficult to. It's clunky, like the sentences are clunky, but it's like a junker car. It just works on this motivation that it's just not going to quit. It's going to the end. But that doesn't make it a Maserati.
Welcome back to part 2. And before we get to our favorite moments, I just want to go on record on the pod as saying I don't dislike this movie. I don't poo-poo it. It just strikes me as puzzling that people, including you, Mike, that people are like, I can't believe you don't love Kiss Me Deadly. That's all I'm saying. And maybe I'm wrong. It's fine, but let's have a conversation, because who knows? By the end of the conversation, you might have convinced me that there's more going on here than I saw.
Maybe, but I think that there's something more elemental going on in this movie. And I think that art is sometimes constructed to make you obey its logic through aesthetic principles. If I can trick you, if I can surprise you, you'll trust me and I can take you a place you didn't intend to go. That's how art works. The source material itself works in such a way, I'm not going to impress you aesthetically, but I'm taking you where you were going anyway. I'm taking you to the place where when you close your eyes at night, your brain goes. And it's like, well, I don't even want to go there. You're not tricking me into going there, but I guess I'm going there anyway. And I think that's the elemental nature of the books and the movie.
So let's talk about our favorite moments. What's yours?
Well, I do have kind of like a classic Cahiers de Cinema moment. which is when Mike Hammer is talking to the guy at the boxing gym, and they're talking about the new beautiful boxer who's going to fight and make his premiere. And in his amateur record, he's totally undefeated. He's a real winner. And Mike Hammer, they spend at least 2 to 3 minutes just talking about the fact that he knows that this guy's going to throw the fight. He knows he's going to throw the fight. He's going to promote him and puff him up and blow him up and show him off to all his friends. But on fight night, he's going down. And what any other movie would do is have you hear the dialogue and then turn and face the ring. And for whatever reason, the actual boxing is not going on in the ring. It's going on between the fight promoter and Mike Hammer. And so the camera stays with the real fight, which is them while they watch the action happen off screen. It's just a violation of the rules of classic cinema. If you're watching Notorious, for example, and Cary Grant is talking to Ingrid Bergman about a horse race, you can see them, and then you can see the horse race with the Hitchcockian binoculars, and then it'll go back to the two of them talking. But again, this seems to be an intentional violation of the rules to produce some other effect, to get to some kind of otherness in the dialogue that a normal movie with that much fodder to shoot cannot resist. It wants to show the thing in the ring because it wants more stuff in itself, and this movie seems to not want that. It seems to shed some of the armor and fodder and grist for the mill that other movies subsume.
So my moment is in the beginning where Mike's driving down the road. He sees Cloris Leachman running, and she just enters the movie suddenly and without explanation, the way people will enter your dreams, like suddenly without explanation. But what's also interesting is that she's running and she's got that raincoat on. And then later in the movie, we meet her roommate, Gabrielle, right, with the short hair, and she's also naked under a bathrobe. So you have these these things start to double up in the movie. And my moment has to do with those two and Velda, Mike's secretary, and the part where he starts talking to her and you realize that he uses her because the other cop says he uses her to kind of like bust up divorce cases, and she gets husbands to sleep with her, and then they use that for blackmail. And what's interesting in this movie, the way those things all go together, is that this movie combines two things. I think it's like sex and atomic power, and that's kind of like they go together, right? So if you were watching this film and somebody else were in the room and they couldn't see what you were watching, and you had the opening credits on, they would think you were watching a blue movie. They definitely would think you're watching a porno movie, because it's all of her heavy breathing and gasping while the credits are going on, and you hear like that Nat King Cole song. So that made me start thinking like, well, this is also strange. Like every kind of weird thing about it is heightened like a dream. And everybody in the movie is weird. Have you noticed that? Like, I'm making fun of the Va-va-voom guy, right? When he talks to the truck driver, when he meets Friday, when he's at the house of the guy who plays the butler in Citizen Kane, the coroner, the guy that runs the locker room, everybody in the movie is like a David Lynch character, right? Isn't everybody in the movie like kind of like a couple degrees off?
Yes, everybody is.
Yeah. And so I think that my moment when he talks to Velda is like the sex in the movie is all like that as well. Like these women come out of nowhere, barely dressed. The Friday starts to kiss Mike Hammer. There's not a cold stone logic to the way the plot is done, nor is there a way like they all want to have sex with Mike Hammer. Like everybody does.
I guess, and again, just going back to some sort of intuitive or elemental logic, right? Imagine that most movies never rise above a 7 in the wish fulfillment department, but they never go below a 4 in the nightmare department. Like bad things happen, but they're logical consequences of bad things happening, like in Out of the Past, right? You screw over the wrong person, it's coming back for you, right? So that's not a nightmare.
Or in The Killers, which we just did, The Killers.
Right, exactly, right? So that's not a nightmare, that's a consequence, right? You get a little bit of what you want, but you don't descend into the pit of hell either. The logic of this movie seems to be, let's set it at what happened if we set it at a 10 and a 0? What if every time you walked into a room and there was a beautiful woman, she did want you? What if every time you encountered a guy who didn't give you the information, you could just smack him without consequences? What kind of universe would you live in? But you could also sink all the way to the bottom. The consequences for whatever that wish fulfillment is would be equally unlimited in the opposite direction, right? For every reaction, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And so you can get whatever you want, but the pit of hell is wide open. And in fact, people are carrying it around and it's in a briefcase.
Well, Mike Hammer, of course, doesn't care about the pit of hell because he's fine navigating through this weird dreamscape. Because, Kurt says you have to make a friend of horror. That's what he says in Apocalypse Now. And that's what Mike Hammer's done. He is not Philip Marlowe, like down these mean streets, a man who must go, who was not himself mean. He's fine with the dream logic of everything because it helps him go from score to score.
He's enjoyed it. And score to score is perfectly said, branch to branch, right? He's swinging through the trees of it until someone's burning the forest down.
Welcome back. In part 3, we always talk about the ending. Well, if you want an ending, this movie's got one. So, Mike, what is your take on the opening of the box?
Well, I've touched on it already. So probably if you've listened to the first 10 minutes of this or 12 minutes of this or whatever it is, you already know how I feel about the box, which is that when you exist in this universe out for yourself, you're getting what you want 10 out of 10. It bottoms out, right? The problem with Out of the Past, or the beautiful thing about The Killers, is that life will go on for everybody else, right? When the assassins come in and kill you or plug you, they're plugging you, but the kid who ran to go warn you, is going to grow up big and strong and buy the gas station, and who knows what happens for him. But there's an implied future in the narrative, and the sadness or the drama of death is that you're not part of that implied future, but there is one for everyone else. Not so in Kiss Me Deadly. The implied future for everyone is that they have about roughly the same life expectancy as you, which is either between 1 and 5 minutes, because something has been unleashed, which is too elemental. I don't want to push the dream thing too far, but it's the great waking up, or it's the end of the dream. And so, like all dreams, it goes on longer than it seems, right? But eventually it comes to an end. Whereas, again, that's not the expectation of art. Most art works because it implies this future, but the implied future is it's an optical illusion. It's like if you see Renaissance art, it looks 3-dimensional. Of course, it's 2-dimensional, and that has a lot to do with shading. There's no shading in this movie. The end of the movie is the end of life, is the end of the movie, is the end of the end. It's
the noir version of Dr. Strangelove.
There's also, I could argue that maybe that Dr. Strangelove is a noir, but yes, if Dr. Strangelove were, but you're spot on.
So there's all that Cold War stuff, which is another reason why, and I'm not being sarcastic, it's another reason why I think this film has risen to the level it has. It's a great Cold War document, right? This thing is atomic power, atomic weapons have been unleashed on the world. Whoever's hands they fall into, that can spell the end of everything for everybody. And sometimes when you're dealing with stuff this scary, you got to get dirty yourself to kind of deal with it and save the world. It's also the premise of Lord of the Rings, right? There's this weapon that's so powerful, we have to destroy it. When the movie ends, it's almost like Mike Hammer is almost aware that he's in this story and he's just watching it end, if that makes any sense. You don't really
lucid dreaming.
Yeah, it's lucid. That's exactly what it is. That's why I couldn't think of it. It's lucid dreaming. It's that moment where you're kind of in between sleeping and wakefulness, and you kind of know you're dreaming, and you're either like struggling to wake up or struggling to stay into the dream.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better. I mean, I will say that I believe that the script writers and some of the producers ran into Mickey Spillane around town. And I think that their confrontations were uncomfortable, because I don't think that he was comfortable with what had been done, because, of course, in true Mike Hammer fashion, Mickey Spillane does not let any of his materials end, right? They all go on and go on because of this dream logic, because it's not held together by aesthetic principles. Why not write 100 of them? Why not write 1,000,000 of them, right? His job is to keep pounding them out to get deeper and deeper into the stream logic. But Kiss Me Deadly violates the key principle of Hollywood production today, which is always leave room for a sequel. Oh, right. Yes. There's no Mike Hammer comic universe, because it ends 90 minutes after it began.
There's no post-credit sequence where another villain finds the box. So thanks for listening, everybody. You can follow us on Twitter at 15MINFilm. You can also follow us on
Letterboxd.
Let us know what to watch next. That was fun, Mike. Thanks. Great pick.